Hello everybody, this is Stephanie. It's Thursday, February 25th. So, it's a beautiful day, but the air is quite stifling. Everybody's eyes is glued on their TV sets, seeing what's taking place between Russia and the Ukraine. I took it upon myself to do a little research to help myself understand why Russia is doing what they're doing and why the Ukraine did what they did in the past 20 years. But before I continue, I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers and to those visitors who's just checking out my videos. If you guys find something interesting in my videos or find something that resonates with you, please consider on subscribing to my channel. When you do, don't forget to hit that top bell so you get future notifications of all my uploads. We'll be right back. Hi guys, it's Stephanie. I just got home about 10 minutes ago, had some errands to run, and when I got home, I was still scratching my head, and I thought all the way on my drive home, why is this little country, the size of Texas, being attacked by the world's second most powerful country in the world? Why? So I did a little bit of searching, and what I discovered totally took me by surprise, because I never knew that Ukraine at one time was the third most powerful country in the world. Here's what I found out. Bear with me.
Twists and turns on what's happening with Ukraine. It's helpful to add a little context on how a nuclear arsenal fits into the picture. So we're going to back up now 3 decades to the early 1990s and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ukraine suddenly found itself independent and the third largest nuclear power in the world. Thousands of nuclear arms had been stationed on its soil by Moscow, and they were still there. In the years that followed, Ukraine made the decision to denuclearize completely. In exchange, it would get a security guarantee from the US, the UK, and Russia, known as the Budapest Memorandum.
The implication was Ukraine would not be let to stand alone and face a threat, should it come under one.
That is Mariana Bujerin of Harvard University. As Russia threatens to invade Ukraine again, that agreement is now front and center.
We are initiating the Budapest Memorandum.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky talking about it just this past weekend in his speech at the Munich Security Conference. Well, I asked Bujerin to step back to how Ukraine saw the agreement when they signed it back in 1994.
It is clear that Ukrainians knew they weren't getting the exactly sort of these legally binding, really robust security guarantees they sought. But they were told at the time that the United States and Western powers, so certainly at least the United States and Great Britain, they take their political commitments really seriously. This is a document signed at the highest level by the heads of state.
Yeah, and people may remember, quite how closely the U.S. was watching. They may remember then President Clinton visiting Kyiv in 1994 and talking about this.
Exactly. And I think perhaps there was even a certain sense of complacency on the Ukrainian part after signing this agreement to say, look, we have these guarantees that were signed. You know, they had this faith that the West would stand by them, or the United States, the signatories and Great Britain would stand up for Ukraine, as it were, should it come under threat. Although the precise way in which was not really proscribed in the memorandum.
So let's fast forward from signing the memorandum, 1994, 20 years, to 2014, and the Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea. We seem to have a problem here. The memorandum was about that Ukraine could not be invaded, that its borders would be respected. What happened?
Well, what happened was exactly that Russia just glibly violated it. And there's a mechanism of consultations that is provided for in the memorandum should any issues arise, and it was mobilized for the first time in, at that point, 20 years, on March 4th, 2014. So there was a meeting of the signatories of the memorandum that was called by Ukraine. It did take place in Paris, and Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, who was in Paris at the time, simply did not show up. So he wouldn't even come to the meeting in connection with the memorandum.
And the Russians argued, look, we signed this, but it was a while ago. It was a different government. Now it's all illegitimate. Was that the basic?
Exactly. That was the basic gist, that we signed it with a different government. But that, of course, does not stand to any international legal criteria, right? You don't sign agreements with a government. You sign it with a country.
You are Ukrainian, I should note. You go back often. You just returned from Ukraine, I gather. What's the conversation today? Is there regret in Ukraine that this memorandum was ever signed, that they gave up their nuclear weapons?
There certainly is a good measure of regret, Mary Louise, and some of it is poorly informed because, of course, it would have cost Ukraine quite a bit, both economically and in terms of international political repercussions, to hold on to these arms. So it would not have been an easy decision. But as we know, in public sphere, these rather more simple narratives take hold. And the narrative in Ukraine publicly is, we had the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. We gave it up for this signed piece of paper, and look what happened. And it really doesn't look good. Doesn't look good for the international non-proliferation regime, because if you have a country that disarms and then becomes a target of such a threat and a victim of such a threat at the hands of a nuclear armed country, it just sends a really wrong signal to other countries that might want to pursue nuclear weapons.
You're making the case that if you were watching all this from, say, Tehran today, you might think, look at the choice Ukraine made. Look where we might find ourselves.
Or from North Korea, exactly.
Oh. So how important do you think the nuclear history is here in trying to understand what is going on today between Ukraine and Russia?
So basically, you've heard it in a nutshell. I truly believe that if Ukraine had never given up their nuclear arms, they would not have been attacked by Russia. Not once, but twice. Again, they were deceived by US, they were deceived by UK and Russia, because these were the countries that's supposed to protect them from an assault. But instead, a country that was part of the agreement to protect is now assaulting them. It's like what they said in the end. What signal is this sending to other countries who sign agreements to denuclearize, to get rid of their nuclear weapons? Okay? They become sitting ducks. That's what they become. That's what happened with Ukraine. Okay? Because you can bet your bottom dollar that if Ukraine still had their nuclear arms, Russia would have thought twice about attacking, okay? Russia's reasoning for attacking after signing these agreements was that back then it was a different government. It wasn't the same government, okay? That's because when these agreements were signed and when they denuclearized, the current president wasn't in office. But if you really look at other pictures under this agreement, the Budapest Memorandum, wouldn't the US, the UK, and NATO also be in violation? Because that memorandum states that they have to protect, okay, Ukraine, and they're not. Obviously, it's because they don't want a nuclear confrontation, okay? But also, there's a lot of money and a lot of currency exchange going back and forth between Russia, the European countries, and the US, okay? This is horrible. This is telling me that the possible death of millions of people does not matter to them, okay? And I also think that in Putin's little mind, he's thinking that NATO is treating Ukraine like a puppet on a string because they're a sovereign country and that they will do whatever they want them to do. This past weekend in Germany, the Ukraine president was requesting to have nuclear arms. Now, don't you think that Russia knows about this? To have a neighbor like the Ukraine, who is a sovereign country, who might possibly become part of NATO in their backyard? I think there are a lot of bad moves by Ukraine, okay? You have Russia, who's your close proximity neighbor country, and you're thinking of becoming part of NATO. Now, you see what's happened, okay? The Budapest Memorandum didn't do a thing to protect the Ukraine. U.S. ain't gonna send their military there. Britain and England is not gonna send any armed forces there. No country in NATO is gonna do that. There's a lot of money at stake here. For me, watching the news and listening to what's going on, and now just finding out this, that 30 years ago, in the 90s, when they denuclearized, they pretty much got a sworn statement, a promise that NATO would protect them. But as you can see, there's a war going on right now, and there's millions of lives at stake. This is horrible. This is horrible. Because not only because there'll be millions of lives in the line here, but other countries who were under pressure not to create nuclear weaponry, like Iran, is now they're not scratching their heads. They're definitely going to go ahead and create nuclear weapons if they don't have them already. What kind of signal are you sending to North Korea, who has nuclear weapons? How can you ask them to get rid of their nuclear weapons to have a safer planet so we can all live together happily. It's never going to happen because that's just what's happening now here. Okay? You go ahead and get rid of your nukes and then you get attacked. Okay? It's horrible. I don't feel safe living in this planet anymore. I always had problems with trust. In a smaller scale, I don't trust anybody that I come in close proximity with. I don't trust it when someone smiles at me that I don't know who they are. I have trust issues with people, let alone countries. But anyway, I hope that I touched on something that maybe some of you didn't know about. I didn't know about this information, but that was NPR News. When I got home, I did a little research and I heard the audio and I thought it to be very interesting. There are millions of people who don't know this because they don't follow the news. And I think Ukraine made a mistake. They made a mistake. Never trust no one. I hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll be talking to you guys soon. Guys, that concludes this evening's film.